Hi, everyone. Good evening. Thanks for joining us tonight. We are here with another webinar. So this is part of a webinar series that we've been hosting for the past few months on different topics that are related to migrant worker rights in Nova Scotia. So today our topic is Nova Scotia labor standards, the labor rules that exist here in Nova Scotia. And we're here with Asaf Rashid, who's an immigration and labor lawyer, and will be sharing more about the organization that he's part of, and called the Workers Action Center. And my name is Stacey Gomez. I'm a member of Known as Legal, Halifax, and our migrant workers program. So I imagine that people are maybe still coming on. So I'll just give a brief overview. So first, we're going to hear from Asaf, and he has a presentation that he's going to be sharing, and then we'll open it up to your questions. You can send us your questions by WhatsApp. Our number is 902-329-9595. That's the number on the screen. And feel free to send us your questions throughout. Maybe something that Asaf shares will spark a question. Feel free to share it throughout the presentation, and then I'll just read out your questions. We won't share your name or anything too specific that might identify you. But yeah, feel free to send your questions throughout, and we will come to them at the later part of the session. So also, just to mention, we're hosting this webinar today in English, but we're planning to host the same one in Spanish next week, same time, same place. So just to let you know, a veces los compañeros que hablan español también están viendo los webinarios, pero les comentamos que vamos a tener igual presentación en español la próxima semana. El martes a igual hora, 7:30 hora de Nueva Escocia. Okay, so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Asaf. Thanks for joining us, Asaf.
Thank you. So hello, everyone. Glad everyone who is there who I cannot see could make it. So now I'm just going to put this this presentation on. So yeah, my name is Asaf Rashid, and I'm a lawyer. I do actually mostly criminal defense these days and immigration law, but I'm also very interested in labor law, and my primary venue through where I support workers is actually called the Halifax Workers Action Center. I'm part of this organization, and this organization is very helpful for workers who need assistance and who are not unionized. And I'll get a bit more to the Workers Action Center very soon. But first of all, just a few little points I'd like to bring up at the beginning. I'm not going to be giving any legal advice. That means I'm not going to be telling anyone specifically what to do. This is only information I'm providing. So knowledge that will help you all to better understand things, perhaps, I hope, that then can be used for if you have an issue you need to raise. If you want to contact the Workers Action Center, then you can get more specific with your issue. But the real point of this presentation is to really help inform you better about your rights as workers. And I'm going to take out this whole immigration avenues. That's a previous presentation, so we're not going to get into that. We won't have time. And let's move on. Okay, so just a little note on just how to think about this that might be helpful. That before taking any action, like if something happens that's you feel is wrong, it's always important to really take note of anything that's happening that you're concerned about as far as your treatment goes. But before deciding on taking any action, perhaps everyone who's in this presentation is aware that the employer's specific work permit makes you vulnerable. You're in position where you're stuck with this one employer, unless there are certain conditions where you can point out that you were mistreated very badly. Then you might be able to get something called an open work permit for a vulnerable worker, but that's a whole other presentation. That's a process. But the employer-specific work permit puts you in a difficult spot where you can't easily leave and just go to another job. And your status in Canada, of course, depends on you keeping your job. So that means really that in approaching any kind of a complaint, raising the issues about your working conditions and how you're treated, you just have to be really careful in how you do it to make sure you're protecting yourself. And keep documentation about everything that happens to you if you're concerned you're being mistreated. And I hope no one is, but if you are feeling that something's happened to you that's unfair, make sure that you keep documentation and also keep it safe, so that if you are concerned that you're being mistreated by your employer, you obviously don't want your employer to look at any documentation you're keeping about how you're being treated. So be careful. So the Halifax Workers Action Center, what is this organization? So it's based in Halifax, but the Halifax Workers Action Center assists workers throughout the whole province. And really what it's for is it's for workers who are not unionized, who need assistance. And often the people who approach the Workers Action Center are low waged in what's called precarious work, where there's not much job security. And the point of the Workers Action Center is to provide information and help workers fight for positive change, fight for improvements in their working conditions, help workers who are making complaints, like making complaints about unfair treatment, uh, or human rights complaints, or a number of other possible issues that you may have. So I'm just going to point out, you'll see on the screen here, that's the URL, the website for the Halifax Workers Action Center, and you can find more information about us there. And also, we'll note that there is we call it a legal clinic to help you with specific issues.
Sorry, Asaf. We are
that
not
you
seeing
can
your presentation move. It's kind of stuck on the first page.
Oh, it's not. You don't see it, really? Because
Yeah.
I'm seeing it, but it's not switching slides.
No.
That's funny. Okay.
Would you like me to share the presentation?
I don't know why it's not sure. How about now? Is it moving now?
No.
Still not. Okay. I don't understand why it's not doing that. Yeah, maybe you can do that.
Sure.
I'm not sure why it's not working for me, but I'm going to stop sharing. Or can you do
Oh,
that from
now
your
it
end?
now it moved.
It moved?
Moved to be prepared. But let me try sharing.
Well, that's interesting. I don't know why it didn't work before, though. So is it working now?
Yes, it is now.
Why
It
don't I
is
do it like
not
this?
full
Then?
screen though.
Is it too hard to see, you think?
No, it's fine. If you can go full screen, then can you see
I
if
can
that
try,
works?
but when it went full screen, I'm going to go full screen again. Is it moving now?
Oh, it's not seeing. We're not seeing it as full screen.
You're not seeing it as full screen? Okay, I don't know what's going on then. Clearly there's something not working. But now are you seeing it move?
Yes.
Okay. Is it okay to do it like this? Does it have to be full screen?
We can still make out the words. That's okay. If you want to zoom in a little bit at the end, you can kind of zoom in a bit. At the right at the bottom.
How's that? Is that better?
Yeah, that might be a
Okay.
bit better.
How about we do that?
Okay.
Okay. I think everything's on there. All right. So where was I at? I
You
was
were
right
talking
here.
about the URL. Yeah. So okay.
Yeah,
It looks
there we
like it's
go.
working
Okay.
now. Okay. Thank you.
Sorry, folks. I didn't realize that you couldn't see the presentation as I was moving through it. Okay, here we go again. So yeah, the Halifax Workers Action Center, you heard what I said. It's pretty simple. I don't need to repeat it. It's there to assist workers who have issues with at their workplace, concerns about their treatment, want to find out how can I complain. How can I complain to what's called labor standards, which is about the employer not following the basic rules that all employers should follow, or maybe there's a human rights issue you're having where you're being mistreated in terms of who you are and being discriminated against. That could be another issue you wish to raise and want assistance with. So the Workers Action Center is there for non-unionized workers. We don't provide legal advice and legal representation, but we provide assistance and help workers and walk them through and assist with filling out forms and can do quite a bit. So if you're interested in having this form of assistance, then you can contact the number that you should see on the screen now. I believe everyone can see that number, 902-221-0755. There's also the email, that's halifaxwac@gmail.com. I believe that's still the same. If you give me a second, I just want to double check to make sure that's the right number, that email that hasn't changed. Yes, it is still the correct email. So you can use either the phone number or the email to reach out to the Halifax Workers Action Center if you're looking for some assistance. Okay, so now, so the Workers Action Center, we have a particular stance towards labor standards. We understand that the relationship between an employer and a worker is fundamentally unequal. The employer, they have all the power essentially in terms of they own the workplace. They can hire and fire. That's the most significant power that they have when it comes to treatment of workers. So there's a real power imbalance, that there's a lot on the employer's side. So we don't believe, the Workers Action Center, that the system is really fair for workers, but the system that we have is the system that today that we have to deal with, and we need to understand how to deal with the system as it is today, but we do want to see it improve. And we believe that when workers organize and are supported in their efforts to try to raise issues and make changes, that better conditions are possible. So before getting to the labor standards, there are certain rules that apply to all workers. There's some differences for migrant workers in fish. It says fish plan, but it's actually fish plant. There's supposed to be a T at the end. So fish plant workers. I'm going to start with that, as I understand some people that are tuning into this workshop may be working at fish plants. So this is, here we go, the fish plant. These slides are reversed. Let me just do that. I'm going to switch this around. Here we go. That's better. Okay. So for fish plant workers, and this applies to all fish plant workers, not just migrant workers who are working in fish plants, that employers do not have to pay employees that work in jobs involving fish processing overtime at 1.5 times the employee's regular rate of pay. So that basically means that it's not about what your actual rate of pay is and multiplying that by 1.5. But when it comes to fish plants, what overtime means is that this, if you're working more than 48 hours in a week, that you have to be paid at least 1.5 times the minimum wage for overtime. So minimum wage is $13.35 an hour, right? So if you're making, let's say, 18 an hour, I'm not sure what wages, anybody who's tuning in here who works in a fish plant, what your actual hourly wage is, but let's say, for example, it's 18 an hour. That would be something in that range. Higher would actually be nice. But if it's 18 an hour, you don't get 18 times 1.5. They drop it to 13.35 times 1.5 for overtime. So it doesn't, it's not great. That's one of the issues in Nova Scotia and actually across the country, is that the minimum wages are far too low. And that means workers don't really get even close to what they deserve. So that's the one issue I wanted to note for fish plant workers in particular, as I am aware that fish plant workers are often working quite a lot of overtime. So if you're concerned about whether or not you're getting paid enough, you're getting paid what you legally ought to get paid, keep that in mind, that it's the minimum wage times 1.5 for all the hours that you work over 48. Okay, so now when it comes to, and this is in particular for migrant workers who are from any part of the Caribbean that have a particular contract. So it's a contract between Canada and the Caribbean for all workers that are doing farm work through the Seasonal Agricultural Workers Program. And if you're one of these workers, then in this case, your contract should state that the employer is responsible for taking you to register your SIN number as soon as possible after your arrival. So this is important for farm workers. There is supposed to be a contract. If you're from the Caribbean, then there is a specific contract for all Caribbean farm workers that are working through this seasonal agricultural worker program. If you're from Mexico, there's a different contract, and that contract doesn't have this statement in it that employers are responsible for taking the workers first in registration whenever necessary, as soon as possible after the worker's arrival. But if you're from Mexico or the Caribbean, whatever, wherever, if your contract does say that the employer is responsible for registering your SIN number, that means they're responsible for doing that, and you can call on the employer to do that if they're not doing it. So for farm workers overall, the labor standards, and this is particularly for migrant farm workers working through the Seasonal Agricultural Worker Program, it's important that there are specific rules for you that prevent the employer from reducing or eliminating any benefit or term. So whatever you start with as far as your benefits that you have, or any conditions of employment that you have, they can't bring those down. If you have that agreement at the beginning, they cannot reduce them. If they can't reduce your wages, they can't say you're working half the amount of time that you initially set out to work. You're supposed to be getting full-time work. They can't bring those down, and those are part of the rules for migrant farm workers through the Seasonal Agricultural Worker Program in Nova Scotia. Now, the thing is, with other farm workers, with farm workers that aren't migrant farm workers in Nova Scotia, it is possible for certain standards to be below what is the minimum for other workers in the province, but that doesn't apply to you. So if you hear information about farm workers and the employers being allowed to treat farm workers in a way where, let's say they don't have to pay the minimum wage, or they don't have to give a day of rest or anything like that, that is information that applies to non-migrant farm workers. For migrant farm workers, your contract actually states certain minimum standards, and the employer cannot go below that. And I also noted here that if you're doing piecework, that there should be a higher rate of compensation than required by minimum wage regulations, and also that you are required to have 1 day off per week. That doesn't apply to other farm workers, but it does apply to migrant farm workers. Okay, now to get to general labor standards. These are labor standards that apply to all workers. So what I'm going to say next is every single worker in Nova Scotia is legally not allowed to fall below these minimum standards. So these are the minimum standards for all workers. If you're a unionized worker, then you have a better contract called a collective agreement, where you should have conditions that are far, far better than the minimum, ideally. But regardless, all workers have to be provided with minimum standards. And the one that a lot of people focus on is the minimum wage. No one is allowed to get paid less than $13.35 an hour. And $13.35 an hour is terrible. That's a very low wage. And these days, with the cost of food and gas and everything else and housing, it's ridiculous that minimum wage isn't higher than that, but that is the legal minimum. And there definitely needs to be a fight to raise that much, much higher. But the thing is, when it comes to how much you're getting paid, you're supposed to get paid what is the prevailing wage. What that means is that what are other farm workers making doing the same kind of work as you? And you're supposed to get paid what other farm workers are getting paid that are doing the same kind of work, not less. Like if a Canadian farm worker is making 16 an hour for doing the kind of work you're doing, you're not supposed to get paid the minimum. You're supposed to get paid what the Canadian farm worker is getting paid. That's the prevailing wage. Overtime is 1.5 times the normal pay after 48 hours in any week. It does not apply to all farm workers, but it does apply if processing fruit, or if you're a seasonal agricultural worker program worker. Unfortunately, there are only 3 unpaid sick days per year under Nova Scotia law. There for a while there was something called the exact name of it. I don't have at the top of my head right now, but Nova Scotia had a particular program for providing a certain number of paid sick days to workers only if they were missing time due to COVID-19. But that has expired as of last month. So that doesn't even apply anymore. That doesn't exist. And now all that there are 3 unpaid sick days per year. And these are used not just for if you're sick, if you have ill family members or for medical appointments, then you can use these unpaid sick days for those purposes. But if you use sick day for an ill family member or for medical appointment, then you don't get more sick days later. And there's also a requirement for a week's notice for termination, or they pay you for that week instead of giving you notice. So what that means is you're supposed to be told with a week in advance about being terminated if you're losing your job, or if they want to pay you for that week, you're not there, but you get paid, and then that suffices for notice. So this applies for all workers who are working for between 3 months and 2 years. And of course, anybody who's doing migrant farm work or fish plant work, you're going to be working for less than 2 years. And between 3 months and 2 years. So this would apply to you. So for all workers in Nova Scotia, if you're required to wait for the start of your shift, like if you're told come to work at 7 a.m., but you don't start work till 9 a.m., you're supposed to be paid at least the minimum wage for any time that you're waiting. I'll keep saying this over and over again. Refer to your contract. If your contract says something different, or that you're supposed to be getting more money, or that there's a better condition, then that's what applies. But this is the minimum for all workers in Nova Scotia. And if you're called in outside of your scheduled hours, the employer is supposed to pay you for at least 3 hours of wages at the minimum wage rate. So that should be $13.35 times 3. Again, refer to your contract. If it says something different, then that's what applies. Every time you're paid, you're supposed to have something called a pay stub. That's documentation of how much you're getting paid. But it's also supposed to be telling you what's being deducted as well. Anytime the employer is taking any money off your paycheck, you have to know exactly what it's for. So for deductions, if you're being charged So if the employer is deducting any of your wages for uniform costs, it's important to calculate it, how much is being deducted. You're not supposed to have deductions that push your wage below the minimum. So if you have to have a uniform, but the uniform costs are high and then it pushes you below the minimum wage, that's not supposed to happen. And deductions, there are deductions though that are allowed to take your wages below the minimum, and those are specific legal deductions. They're called statutory deductions. So for income tax, Canada Pension Plan, employment insurance, and this is just applies to workers in general. That those deductions are allowed, and they should be shown on your pay stub. You should see exactly where the deductions are happening. And for food, a specific maximum is allowed for deductions, and that'll be in your contract. Whether you're if you're a farm worker from either that's working through the Caribbean contract, the Mexican contract, then there are specific maximums that are allowed for deductions for food. For housing, for migrant farm workers, there is no amount of money that you're supposed to be deducted for housing. That's not supposed to happen. For if there is a pay advance made to you, or the employer accidentally pays you twice as much as your rate of pay says you're supposed to get paid, then they can deduct that. In other words, if they have paid you money that you weren't owed, then they can deduct that. If there are employee purchases from the employer's business on some account, like let's say you're getting you have an account with the employer to purchase some of the employer's produce, there has to be an agreement for that. The employer can't say, "Oh, look, you can have some of the produce that you're harvesting, and that's going to be deducted from your wages." That doesn't work. If there's any kind of an arrangement where you're having a deduction from the amount you're getting paid, that has to be part of an agreement. If there's deductions for dry cleaning of woolen or other heavy material uniforms, then that is the employer is able to take that out of your pay, and if it brings you below the minimum wage in any given week, then that is considered acceptable in the law. Any other deductions to be specifically stated in your contract. It's very important to make sure that the employer is not violating any of the minimum requirements for the employer in your Caribbean or Mexican contract if you're a farm worker. So more special conditions for migrant work. And this is part of the labor standards. It's right in the law that applies to all workers. There's a section specifically covering migrant workers, and employers and recruiters are not allowed to keep your passport or work permit. That's your property. The employer is not supposed to say, "Give me that, let me hang on to that, I'll keep that in a filing cabinet," or whatever. Nope, they can't do that. That's your passport, that's your work permit, and you get to keep that on you. In regards to your work permit, and this is getting into immigration law, just being careful in general that you really need to make sure that you have that work permit original and make copies of it just in case, because that is your proof of your legal status in Canada. So it's very important to not lose that. Employers cannot eliminate or reduce your wages, benefits, or other terms and conditions of employment like hours. They can't actually do that if you're a migrant worker. You also can't agree to an elimination or reduction in wages, benefits, or terms or conditions. They can't come up to you and say, "Hey, listen, I'm having a hard time this summer, so I'm going to bring you a new contract, and you're going to sign it, and this is going to in half." that's illegal. The employer can't do that. So any attempt by the employer to try to get you to agree to accept worse conditions than what you agreed to at the beginning when you came, then that should be an unlawful agreement, and it's very clear that that's not supposed to happen. So basically, the employer is not supposed to ask you to accept negative changes to your working conditions. But if they want to pay you more, if they want to improve your working conditions, they can do that. And that's perfectly legal, and that's great if they did that. So there are certain situations, very exceptional situations, where the employer can reduce wages if there is an unavoidable change in economic conditions that affects the business. So if there's an absolute disaster that the employer is facing, if there's a financial collapse, there's some big change that's affecting the whole industry, or there's some natural disaster, let's say, which a drought or something that leads to horrible conditions, then it is possible for the employer to reduce wages, but it has to be an extreme kind of a situation. But then they can't do it just for migrant workers. They're not allowed to. They have to do it for all the workers. If the employers only make conditions worse, even if there is some kind of an emergency situation, if they say to migrant workers, oh, I'm going to have to cut all your wages in half, but then they don't do that for Canadian workers, that makes it illegal. So first thing is, they can only make these negative changes if there's an absolute disaster situation. And if they do that, they have to do it for all workers, not just migrant workers. And they can't make reductions that go below the minimum wage. So when I say they can reduce the wages, there's still a legal minimum. So that minimum wage, that really bad minimum wage of $13.35 an hour, they can't go below that anyway. It doesn't matter if there's an emergency or disaster. If you're making like $16 an hour, then they could reduce it to $13.35 only if there's an absolute emergency that is an unavoidable change in economic conditions. Basically, it's not easy to for the employer to prove that the situation is really that bad. So the proof has to be on them to demonstrate that that's the situation. Otherwise, there's absolutely no basis to make your conditions worse. And keep a record of anything. If the employer tries to make any changes at all to your working conditions, they try to make anything worse, or if you're not sure, say they make some kind of a change that affects you in terms of your housing, let's say, or in terms of just the safety at work, and you're not sure if there's something that's happening that is a negative change. It's good to keep track record of that, exactly what's going on, what's happening, who said what, and then maybe you'll have a basis for a complaint. You can't be charged for recruitment if you came to Canada through recruitment agency. What happens with that is the employer is supposed to pay for recruiters, not you. So the employer can't then come to you and say, "Oh, I'm deducting some of your pay in order to cover the cost of it." That was a situation that had been happening a lot before, and I would say it's probably still happening in some places, but there is, at the very least now, law that is supposed to stop that from happening. So if that is happening to you, if you're being charged a fee for recruitment-related services, you're told to that by the employer that they're going to deduct money from you because they have to recover costs for recruitment, then that's illegal. Okay, so the contract. So I mentioned the contract a number of times, and this is for farm workers in particular. I'm not sure about for fish plant workers. Maybe Stacy can shed some light whether workers in fish plants actually have a contract, like a contract similar to the Caribbean or contracts. But we can get to that after the presentation is done. We're almost actually done the presentation. So the contract sets special conditions that go beyond Nova Scotia's labor law. So whatever the minimums are in Nova Scotia, there are some conditions in the contract that you have that are supposed to protect you in ways that Nova Scotia's law doesn't. So, for example, both the Caribbean and Mexican contracts say you can't get less than 240 hours of work in a 6-week or shorter period. Right? You can get more though, but they can't give you less than 240 hours in a 6-week or shorter period. If the term of employment in both the Caribbean and Mexican contracts is 8 months, and I say here there's an extra month for the quarantine period. So I'm just going to say that's old information from last year. What exactly is going on with the quarantine right now? Everything is changing. So I'm not sure exactly what the situation right now is with the quarantine period and what has been happening with that. And based on the information that I have, just like it has been the case year after year, there's always a date of December the 15th that all farm workers are supposed to depart from Canada. And if you're transferred, then you still have 8 months and an end date of December 15th. So if you're working on one farm and then there's a transfer from one farm to another, then you still have the 8 months. You don't get extra time if you lost a bit of time in that transition. Okay, I think I made this too big. Just give me a sec here. All right, here we go. Yeah. So your contract has a number of other requirements that must be met for your housing. And I mentioned this already, but I'll repeat it. There can be no cost for housing. You cannot have deductions from your pay to cover for the cost of housing. The employer is supposed to provide housing for farm workers. And they're supposed to provide washing machines and, where possible, dryers. That is a very vague condition, and I'm not exactly sure how it's being applied in different farms, but at the very least, you must have a washing machine. And if they're paid washing machines, then the employer has to provide $5 per week for those laundry services. If the employer is providing meals, the cost of those meals cannot go beyond $10 per day. So this is something else to keep track of. If there are employer provided meals, to keep track of how much you're being charged for that. Let's say they're not charging you per day, but they're charging you per week. It'd be good to have those calculations to know that you haven't been charged more than $10 per day. You all have a trial period of 14 actual working days from the date of arrival at the place of employment. And the employer is not supposed to discharge the worker except for sufficient cause or misconduct or refusal to work during a trial period, right? So that covers you for that trial period that you're not supposed to be discharged unless those specific conditions are there. So what happens if the rules aren't being followed? Let's say you've been paid less than you're supposed to be paid. Let's say the employer charged you for housing or made deductions from your contract, from your pay that pulled you below the minimum wage or didn't pay you overtime. Then you could have the basis to make a complaint. So if your complaint is specifically a labor standards complaint, so specifically regarding being taken below the minimum wage or not being paid proper overtime, and basically your standards fall below what the legal minimum is allowed to be, then that is where you would have a basis to complain about your labor standards being violated. But unfortunately, you can't just fill out a form. You can't just go to the internet site, government internet site, and download a complaint form. that should be the way it is, but it isn't. You need to call and request a complaint form, and the incident has to have been within 6 months in order for you to be able to. Let's say you were underpaid. Let's say you were underpaid for a whole month. You were paid less than you were supposed to be for a whole month, and you're owed $800. Let's say, right? So if that happened, then you have 6 months from the date that it started happening uh, to file your complaint. If you file your complaint late, let's say this happens the first month you're here, and you decide only in December to file your complaint, like right before you're ready to leave, then this past 6 months. So even if something was wrong was done to you, or you were not being paid what you were supposed to, if 6 months have passed, you're not even allowed to make a complaint at that point. And I put the number up for the Halifax Workers Action Center. You can contact the Halifax Workers Action Center for assistance if you want to make a complaint. We're very familiar. The Workers Action Center is very familiar with how to do that. So tips for filing complaints. I'll repeat it again. You have 6 months after an incident. So if something happened, make sure that you record exactly the date or dates it happened. If it's an incident that took place over a period of time, like not getting paid what you were supposed to for a period of a whole month, it starts from the first day you were underpaid. From that day, 6 months from that day, that's the last day you can make a complaint about that first day. If you follow what I'm saying, everything that happened to you has to be within that 6 months to make that to have a valid complaint. Keep careful records of all documents. So anything your employer gives you, of course, if you have a contract, then make sure you have that. Pay stubs, keep those. Put it in a place that you can find it if you need it. If you get a letter of termination, save that. Work schedules, policies, anything about health and safety at work, keep all of it. Make sure you put it on a place that you can find it. Keep it organized, because if something is happening to you that you believe is unfair, it's not following the rules, then you want to make sure that you have any documentation you need if you need to try to demonstrate how rules aren't being followed. If you want to complain anonymously, you have to explain why. So that is something that you can raise with if you want to make a complaint. You can call the Workers Action Center. We have someone on staff. There's also volunteers. Whoever you talk to, explain if you want to complain anonymously, and then the whole pros and cons. What's good about it, what's bad about it can be discussed with you. But it's harder to make an anonymous complaint. Let's just put it that way. So the federal government, this is also information that I presented on approximately a year ago about the federal government's tip line about specific conditions that have to do with a seasonal agricultural worker program. And this is supposed to be a confidential tip line. The number you should be able to see there is 1-866-602-9448. And that is, let's say that the employer has not provided you the minimum conditions of housing that they're supposed to. That would be something that would be more ideal to make a complaint to their tip line, because it's not directly part of the labor standards for all workers in Nova Scotia. The thing with the tip line is, at least going back a few years, there were problems that workers were having with it, about basically farmers found out about complaints and were notified about inspections happening on their site, and warned workers against saying anything to make the employer look bad. And the government had claimed as of last year that they would have agents to speak to you on the phone in your language of choice. I'm not sure how that's actually turned out, whether that actually is something they have followed up on or not. So there had been problems in the past, and there was publicization of it, and the word was that the government was going to do better to make this a better system. I don't know if that's the case, but it's best if you're going to complain to get support. And I mentioned the Workers Action Center, but of course, there's also No One Is Illegal that can help you out as well if you want support. So another point I want to make is that it's important to be strategic, like be careful in how you go about this. If you're going to make a complaint, have support. It's better not to try and do it alone, but call the Workers Action Center, contact No One Is Illegal, get the help that you need in order to make sure that that there's support there. Employers are not supposed to dismiss workers after making a complaint. That's actually illegal, but they sometimes do that. And with migrant workers, there's a higher risk because of your immigration status. And it's also possible that if you make a complaint too late about your employer not following the rules that they're supposed to, that are the minimum rules for all workers in the province, you can use that complaint if you did make a complaint like that to support an application for an open work permit for vulnerable workers. And it's possible that those could all fit together depending on what happened. If what the employer did could be called abuse of some kind. Okay, I'll put the number back up there. If you have concerns about your labor rights being violated, need assistance, you can contact the Halifax Workers Action Center, 902-221-0755. And the email there, halifaxwac@gmail.com. And this website's wrong. The website has changed. It's the website I put up before, which is halifaxwac.ca. Website changed since last year. Let me just make sure that's right. Yeah, that's it. All right. So now we're to questions. It took a little longer than I thought, but here we go. Stop
Thanks,
sharing.
Asaf. Oh, sorry, there's a bit of a echo. Yeah, that was great, really informative. And yeah, we definitely get a lot of questions from workers around labor standards. So yeah, great that you were able to go in depth around that. So yes, just to remind everyone, feel free to send us your questions on WhatsApp at 902-329-9595. Get your messages and questions, or if you have any comments, feel free to send those as well, and we'll read them out. But we won't share your name or any details that might, reveal your identity. So as we wait, let's have a little chat as we're waiting for people to respond. So one thing I found interesting is like how in Nova Scotia the amount of time to make a complaint is only 6 months, which seems quite short.
Yeah.
And how in Ontario it's 2 years, and I understand that there's more time now that with COVID that the window is even bigger. So it's just interesting to see that.
Yeah, Nova Scotia's labor laws are some of the worst in Canada as far as protections. It's quite miserable for any worker that in Nova Scotia that is working in a kind of a job where the wages are very low, where there's a high turnover, like in the food service, for example, a lot of service jobs. It's very difficult because the minimum wage is so low, and no one can survive on the minimum wage now. I mean, with the cost of food and housing and gas and everything, it's impossible. But there are workers that's all they're getting paid, and it's just surviving every month. It really needs to go up, way up. And there is a strong push there. There's organizing in Nova Scotia to try and push the minimum wage up. Halifax Workers Action Center is actually quite involved with that, as well as a number of unions in the province are trying to push for increases to the minimum wage and other standards for all workers in the province. So for non-unionized workers, it's really tough in Nova Scotia for non-unionized workers.
Yes, for sure. Yeah, thanks a lot, Asif. And yes, with migrant workers have also identified that as a key issue. I believe it was last year, we did a survey of workers, about 100 workers, migrant workers responded. And one of the key issues that was raised was the need for an increase in the minimum wage. And we have been sharing updates with workers about the increases in minimum wage. And maybe Tabasa could throw up on social media the graphic that we sent to workers that shows the schedule for the increases, because there's going to be two times per year in the next few years up until 2024, when it's supposed to get to $15 an hour. So yeah, just to share that information, and workers have shared, they otherwise wouldn't be getting that information around the minimum wage. And so just helpful for people to know that is going up, but not quickly enough, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that the government they make it look like there are these significant improvements being made, but they're actually insignificant improvements, because the cost of living is going up way higher than the minimum wages. Like, the cost of living increases just in the last year have been unbelievable. It's just been everything. Gas has doubled in price. Food prices for some foods, it's almost doubled for some foods. It's unbelievable how high the prices have gone in the last couple of years, in particular in the last few months. And it's probably going to get much worse because of the situation on the world stage right now. Everything that's going on with the war right now, that's causing supply shortages. That's means certain food supplies are being cut off from some places. It's going to go up significantly in the next year, and workers need to have the support to cover all that, meaning higher wages. Or at the very least, there should be subsidies for food and housing and whatever. But that's not going to happen without significant organizing. That's the reality. I'm a lawyer, and only so much can be done through the law. The reality is that most of the biggest changes don't happen in the courts. They happen as a result of people organizing to make things better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, thanks a lot, Asif. And migrant workers are adding their voices to those calls for an increase in the minimum wage. And that's definitely something that at the provincial level can be changed to significantly improve workers' lives, because the majority of the workers that we connect to are making the minimum wage. So it's too low.
Is that what farm workers are making in Nova Scotia? They're making the minimum? That's considered?
Yeah.
Okay, interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't sure about that, actually, because I mean, that's only supposed to happen if other farm workers are also making the minimum wage. But I guess that is the case. Farm workers in general are making the minimum wage, which is, it's not a good situation right now. I see that. Check out the graphics and minimum wage increase here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we posted it on the website. So just encourage people to have a look at that. I would I'll try to share my screen. Let's see what happens.
Yeah.
Okay. Though, if I share my screen, will people be able to see my files? Probably.
Well, you can select a particular file. It should show you a screen where you can pick a particular
Perfect.
file that you can show, and that's very important for me. So I have all kinds of stuff on my screen right now about other clients' files that I'm working on. I have like 20 things open, so I'd made sure that only my presentation could be seen.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Let's see here. Okay, let me try to. Strangely, it's not really coming up. I'm going to try this again. What's going on here? Okay. Oh, there it is. Okay, so I think you should be able to see that. So yeah, this is the schedule for the increase to the minimum wage that's going to be happening in the next 2 years. And you can also see that information on our website. So yeah, I encourage you to check that out, share that with other workers so that everyone is in the know. And we have been getting, we have heard from workers that they're not being paid the minimum wage. So it's, just pretty, essential. It's like the most basic, I would say, is to be able to get paid the minimum wage. And Asaf, I wanted to ask you if you could maybe walk viewers through what does it look like? Say you call and you get the form to make a labor standards complaint, and then you submit your form, and then what happens? Like, what are the steps that would happen after you do that?
So after what happens once you start the process is there's, first of all, getting to the form. In filling out the form, it's really important to make sure that the actual rule that was broken is made very clear. Some people, what they do when they complain about everything bad that happened. And of course, it makes sense, but when it comes to these complaints about the law being violated, everything you say has to connect to the specific legal issue that you want to raise. If it's, I have not been paid the minimum wage, or I have suffered from deductions from my wages that took me below the minimum, it's about listing all of them, showing the calculation, showing how it's less than the minimum after the deductions, showing that the deductions that were made to take below the minimum were deductions that the employer were not allowed to do. The very specific deductions that are allowed to take you below the minimum, like deductions for EI, CPP, and the income tax, things like that. That's not even the employer's power. They can't actually do anything about that. If the employer is making deductions beyond all that, and you're going below the minimum, then you just need to show that very clearly in your complaint. So that's a starting point, because otherwise, if it's not clear that you actually have a complaint that is showing a clear violation of the law, if it just sounds like you're complaining about being treated unfairly, but whoever's reading it isn't sure what the issue is, that could get dismissed. If it doesn't get dismissed, then there's a number of steps. I would really just encourage you to contact the Halifax Workers Action Center to be walked through the process. It doesn't always look the exact same. If your complaint goes ahead, you're supposed to you be contacted. The verification that the complaint is in progress, and there should be the opportunity to for one, whoever is the officer who is looking at it will always want to try to encourage some deal with the employer. They always want to do that. That's their first move, is to try and help in negotiating or mediating. They call it a settlement of some kind. But if that doesn't work, if that's something that's just not uh, something that either side wants to do, or that you don't want to do, then it could go to an actual hearing. It's possible for it to get to that level, but that could take some time. It's not necessarily a very fast process. It could take many months to go ahead and get to that level. I'm not sure exactly what the timelines are these days. I don't really, most of what I do these days actually is criminal law and immigration law. I mean, a lot of criminal trials lately. Uh, I'm not exactly sure what the timelines are for these labor standards complaints these days.
Mhm.
It sometimes changes, but that's information like Workers Action Center, who are we're doing our people are doing those complaints, assisting with those complaints on a regular basis, and would know what the timelines are right now. So
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Asaf. And we've also been supporting workers with labor standards complaints, and maybe I could just share a little bit about the timelines from that.
Sure.
We've noticed it's been like 6 weeks or more for it to get assigned to an officer in our recent experience. And yes, I think it's important to, as you say, to mention that it could take some time to go through the process. So it's kind of an investment in time.
And it might be, I mean, I'm sure, Stacey, in your experience, it's been, and from what I'm aware of, when it comes to migrant workers making complaints, it could be you make the complaint and it's not till you come back the following year where you actually dealing with it. It's not, like, 8 months is not a long time. And the likelihood that if it does go to a hearing, then it'll happen within that period of time, I don't think it's very likely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll say, currently we're dealing with some labor standards complaints that were made like last year still.
Yeah.
So still in the process.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But I think, definitely good for people to be aware that could happen. And I have a question around recruitment fees because recruitment fees, as you mentioned, are illegal. Migrant workers. This is more pertinent to, I would say, seafood processing workers or workers in other sectors, not the seasonal agricultural workers program, because that's more through ministries, like country ministries of labor or agriculture. And so we sometimes hear from workers that their employer is asking them to pay legal fees. And so that, yes, does raise some flags in terms of, because, migrant workers shouldn't be made to pay recruitment fees, and then no fees should also be passed on to the worker. So just if you have any comments on that, would be.
Yeah, there's not that's definitely sounds to me like something that is not supposed to be happening. Legal fees, that sounds like another way for the employer to recover costs. Here's the thing with the employer, as I mentioned before, and I think everyone who's been working as hard as you all are know there's a power imbalance. The employer has so much power. The employer has the resources to invest. That's their job, is to invest resources in their operation and make sure that when they hire workers that they are paying those workers what the workers are owed and not going below the minimum standards. Part of what the employer can do to make sure that they have enough of a workforce is to invest in finding a recruiter or an agency to help assist the employer in finding workers in another country. That's the employer's responsibility to do that if they want to do that, to try and make sure they have enough of a workforce. It's not the worker's responsibility. The employer is gaining all the benefits from that. So why should the workers be having to pay a recovery fee for that? That's the employer doesn't even have to do that. The employer is choosing to recruit. If I choose to do something, I have to pay for it, not somebody else. It's just complete nonsense that the employer is charging money for what are supposed to be investments made by the employer. Legal fees, I'm not sure what exactly that even means. Like, legal fees for what? For the employer having to hire a lawyer to make sure that all their paperwork was in order for recruitment. Again, that's the employer's investment, not yours. You don't benefit from that. You don't get any cut from that. It's complete nonsense in my view. Anything like that, like these mysterious fees, hidden fees, anything that it's not clear even what it is. Like, what even are legal fees that they're talking about? Definitely something to write down, to try and get some more details on, and possibly the basis for a complaint about a deduction that's an unlawful deduction. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks for sharing your perspectives around that. And let's see. Okay, question. You mentioned that anonymous cases are harder to justify. Are there any anonymous complaints that have been successful that you know?
That's a good question. It is often very hard for employees to deal with these complaints. Unfortunately, most complaints don't even get made because it's very difficult for workers being as busy as they are, uh, and just the process taking so long and not knowing what's going to happen. A lot of workers just move on even though they have valid complaints. So if you keep the stats on that, you can say that most complaints that could be made aren't even made, and then out of those that are made, there's a lot of advantages the employer has: more money, they can hire a lawyer easily, most cases, things like that. So it puts workers in a difficult position. As far as the stats on anonymous complaints, I don't know that actually. It's hard enough as it is. Uh, and with the anonymous complaint, there just needs to be an explanation why. So it would be having to explain the particular vulnerabilities, and of course, migrant workers, that would make sense. Uh, labor standards likes to claim that they protect anonymity and that workers have nothing to fear and it won't come back to haunt them because the employer is not allowed to punish a worker for making a complaint. But the reality is, employers do that. That does happen sometimes. So there is clearly a reason why workers would want to make an anonymous complaint. Um, yeah, I don't really have any direct information on that. It's just it becomes just another step you have to take to try to demonstrate how you fit in the category of someone who needs to make an anonymous complaint. So just an added burden for you. That's all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. And let's see here if there's any other questions. Just encourage people, if you have any questions, feel free to send us a message on WhatsApp at 902-329-9595. And yeah, happy to answer your questions. And let's see. If I'm traveling while working, so I think that probably means like traveling to like a work site. Am I supposed to be paid for that time? Does it count as wait time?
Travel. This has been covered. I've read a case on that last year where travel time to work is uh, supposed to be paid for if the travel, specifically travel to get to work. There's supposed to be coverage of that. That's part of your work. Uh, as far as wait time, it's more accurate that you're when you start work is, if you're part of your job is to travel to work. I know some workers, they may live like very close to the site and there's not really a significant travel time, but for those who uh, there is an actual travel time and they're required to to travel to work, and there's some arrangement made for bringing workers to work and you have to be ready and all that, then you should be able to include that as part of your work time.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great, thank you. And let's see if we have any more questions. Yeah, looks like we don't have other questions at the moment. So yeah, maybe we'll close it off there. So yeah, thank you, Asaf, for joining us. Great chatting with you. And thanks to Tabasa for the tech support. And yeah, we will be here same time next week in Spanish with Asaf. And a volunteer who will be supporting on the Spanish interpretation. All right. Thanks. Thanks, everyone. And have a good night.
You too.
And share the video with other people. See you.